Great. Again, thank you everyone for joining. I welcome everyone to the January 10th regular board meeting. Again, I apologize for the slight delay, but it looks like we are going. We're up and running via Zoom as well. We will open this meeting with the Pledge of Allegiance. If I can get you to join. Thank you. Just a quick intro in Spanish. Esta junta se lleva a cabo en inglés, pero contamos con servicio de traducción si alguien gusta hacer un comentario público o recibir explicaciones en español. Por favor, indique su necesidad. Should anyone wish to participate in citizen comments, you may sign up by completing the citizen comment forms at the entry of the room and turning your form in with Kim White. Virtual attendees also had the opportunity to complete the form online before the meeting. We're going to move right into the consent agenda. Are there any modifications the board would like to make to the consent agenda? Okay. Hearing none, in the consent agenda, we have the regular board meeting minutes from the December 13 meeting, vouchers and payroll, personnel report, contracts. Please note that the noise opera contract has been pulled from the consent agenda. The contract will be presented at a future date, and the October 22nd financial report. Do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
Move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Julie has moved to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
And seconded by Laura. Any discussion? If there is no discussion, all in favor of adopting the consent agenda, say aye.
Aye.
Great, the consent agenda is approved. Next is citizen comments. Kim, do we have any comments? We do not. Okay. And moving right along to special presentations. Today we have our ASB report, our students joining us once again. We have representatives for both Wenatchee High School and Westside High School, and I will invite Westside High School to join us at the podium for the presentation.
I don't think it's on. Okay. Hello, my name is Carter. I'm the Vice President of the Leadership Club at Westside High School. I'm sitting in for Soraya Martinez, who could sadly not make it tonight due to participating in the Apple Blossom Top 10 process. So good luck to her. I'm here to tell you what's been happening. We've been working on a veterans letter writing campaign since November. We will be mailing somewhere around 200 letters out this week. The veterans we write are all over the country and who have served in the Vietnam War and the Iraq and Afghanistan War. Our advisor, Ms. Sheena, has contacts for the troops that served who provided her with a list of names and addresses to all these veterans. We had a super successful Winter Spirit Break week that ended with the 7th annual talent show with 16 acts and staff, with 16 students and staff acts. It was awesome. Our Bomba socks this year were crazy. We partnered with so many community members and organizations that were wiped out of socks instantly. Of course, we always keep some room for students, staff, and families, etc., if there is a need. Due to this, when we fill out our renewal form, Bomba has increased our donation amount, so we will now be receiving 10,000 pairs of socks. They also changed when we will receive our socks, which normally we receive in the fall, and now our shipment could come anytime between now and March, which is awesome for our community. Now we need to find a place to store 40 giant boxes of socks. Our Valentine's fundraising project this year is selling Crush soda. That way you can buy a crush for your crush or your friend or a teacher, a classmate, or me. We have 6 students representing Westside on the Superintendent's Advisory Council, and we are looking forward to sharing our voice this year. We appreciate the opportunity to share with the Superintendent Board about our amazing school. Thank you.
Thank you, Carter. Does anybody have any questions for Carter? Great. I just have a comment. So last year there was a posting on social media about need for socks for our homeless population here in Wenatchee.
Yeah.
And somebody said, contact Westside.
Yes.
And then that organization actually was gifted socks that were able to go to our homeless community here in Wenatchee. So keep up the good work.
Thank you.
And thank you for coming and deputizing for Soraya today. You did a great job. And your fellow students are doing excellent things. Thank you.
Next, we'll have Wenatchee High School.
Okay. All right. Good evening. My name is Courtney Dodge. I'm the student body president at Wenatchee High School. So picking up where we left off last time. So we had a very successful homecoming week, and because of selling over 1,000 tickets for the dance, we had to move it outside for safety reasons because our gym just couldn't hold that many students. For Veterans Day, our assemblies team worked hard to put on assembly for each class, and then our administration had a student recognition assembly that followed each of those. Then the Honor Society put on a canned food drive for our Panther House in order to help our school's community going into the holidays. They currently have around 60 members and are opening up the applications to join at the semester. And then during the World Cup, some teachers organized a class competition over who could decorate their door the best according to the team they were assigned to. Our halls were filled with decorations, and some classes were taking up an entire wall to decorate. So many games were shown during lunch or in the background during work time in class. And overall, the hype around the World Cup created a new sense of community in the high school, and as soccer fans and non-soccer fans engaged in part of the celebrations. And then our music program held a successful student-led fundraiser called the Magical Feast, where in a medieval-themed dinner, they played music and entertained guests in order to raise funds. And then leading up to winter break, we had a Spirit Week that was created by our Spirit team, a Candy Cane Graham fundraiser led by our Junior Senate, and then a mental health committee handed out informational flyers in preparation for the break. And then coming back from winter break, which is now, the ASB has been working hard on raising funds for the litter box game beneficiary. They held a classroom competition, a Polaroid booth, and then my personal favorite, we taped a teacher to the wall. And so this is all part of a competition against Eastmont that annually happens in order to fundraise for a community member in need. So this year we're working with the Make-A-Wish Foundation to send a little girl to Disneyland. And then today is the big game, hence why I'm in Spirit gear. And so we're at the Town Toyota Center where the competition will come to the end when all of our basketball teams play against each other. And then today we had a pep assembly in order to help advertise and celebrate the litter box game. And later this week, we're going to have a Martin Luther King assembly. And then our culture coordinator and team are hard at working to try to fulfill the school's winter wishes. And their goal is to get everyone a gift who asks for one. So thank you.
Thank you, Courtney.
Thanks, Courtney.
Any questions, comments? Thank you. Next up is a special presentation from Dr. Louder on the superintendent's search. While we get Dr. Louder up on the screen, just a couple brief points. We are moving right along in the planning calendar of the superintendent search. In November and December, Dr. Louder and Dr. Valderas conducted the stakeholder group meetings in person and via Zoom. Earlier this month, the board received the Educational Partners Report, which included the in-person and Zoom meeting feedback, as well as the survey results, unedited with the few exceptions of name redactions. Last week, the board also received a set of interview questions for the board to review and make recommendations for questions to use for the 3 interviews. With that said, I will turn it over to Dr. Louder.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Yes, that's a yes?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for having me here tonight to give you some updates on what we've been doing. Over the, in the months of November and December, the 2 consultants that were mentioned earlier, thank you for that, from McPherson Jacobson held in-person meetings, 2 full days, probably 12 hours each, and Zoom meetings with staff, students, community members to ask them questions that help us with the sorting and vetting process of your applicants, of which we currently have 19. And as I had said earlier, we tend to have some of the best applicants in the last few days. So I will expect to see a few more come in before it closes. The executive summary, and that's what I'm going to talk about tonight, is in answer to 4 questions. The first question, well, the 4 questions are what's good about the community, what's good about the district, What are the issues the new superintendent will face? And what are the characteristics and qualities the next superintendent will need to be successful? That actually helps us build a profile so we can then measure the candidates' experiences and their skills and abilities against the kinds of things that your community is talking about, and your staff is talking about, your students are talking about. So in general, when they talked about the community, and there's a lot of love for the community, people love the outdoors. They love the recreation opportunities. There's a sense that people feel that they're living in a small town, but they have the perks or benefits of a much larger community. And that, of course, is because Wenatchee is the center for many services in the eastern part of the state. The community's fastest growing groups are your Hispanic population and your retiree group. And they're moving to the area because of the cost of living and the quality of life. Tremendous amount of volunteerism, and that was shared amongst all the groups. And we had 23 meetings during this time. The report that I'm referencing actually is 110 pages long. Let's see. There's a strong sense of pride in the community. There's a sense that if something needs to be done, people will get together. It's a collaboration, a spirit that is rare. It is not common amongst lots of communities across the nation. Many resources in the community for students, and even the students said the community was wonderful about putting things together for them and coming up with things that are needed for students' welfare, students' health, students' recreation. So they were very pleased with that as well. The next question was, what's good about the district? Many things were mentioned. Dual language program, there was lots of support for that. Lots of diversity in the community, and that certainly is growing as I mentioned earlier. The fact that staff is very dedicated. All groups talked about the hardworking, dedicated staff focusing on what's best for kids. There's a lot of pride in the fact that the staff is so dedicated and so hardworking. The alternative programs, even the kids were talking about how they felt they were great programs to keep kids engaged and in school and help them to be successful beyond the K-12 setting or the pre-K-12 setting. Teachers were very positive about the middle school schedule. They were very happy that it allowed them to do their planning, their collaborative planning time, and they were very happy with the work that they're doing in their PLCs. Teachers reported feeling valued and supported, as they should. And by the way, that is not as common as one would hope. The third question, what are the issues the new superintendent will face? Well, I think common amongst all the groups, including our students, the budget shortfall was on the minds of everyone. Many communities, like many communities in the state and across the nation, there is a political divide, and that was shared amongst all of the different groups that we spoke with. The new superintendent will need to be able to bridge that gap and marshal both sides to focus their energies and resources upon the needs of students. Many groups were concerned over the growing homeless population, the poverty rate, the growing needs of the non and limited English speaking population. There's a common concern. A common concern was there was a feeling that generational families controlled the agenda. And I think that's not uncommon. I think that's something that is, people have been around for generations, have a larger voice than the people who are newcomers, I think. And I think that is very common around the country. But I think it's being felt here, and there is a change that people feel that needs to be done, because there seems to be a concern that we're not hearing as much from the underserved populations, or at least maybe not getting their fair share of listening time. Gang activity at the middle school was an issue that needed attention. They don't feel it's out of control, but they do feel that they want to address it so that it doesn't continue or grow and get worse. Critical need for funds to remodel or rebuild the aging high school. And if you're going to do that, clearly you're going to have to bridge the gap between the two sides, or more than two sides, in the community. The fourth question was, what are the characteristics and experiences and traits the next superintendent will need? Stability of leadership was probably one of the most common things that was mentioned in all of the groups. People want the next superintendent to give a long-term commitment to the community and to the district. They don't want that person to come and use them as a stepping stone, or to come and leave because they're not happy with the area or they don't have connections. So that was something that was universal. The next superintendent must be a clear communicator, transparent, perceived as a listener, a real person who has humility and can admit their own mistakes, but then move forward. A highly visible person in the schools and the community, one who can bridge the gap between the factions in the community. A strong leader that will stand their ground and unite groups to focus upon the students' needs. An educator who has the proven experience managing change and supporting the needs of the underserved, and has strong fiscal skills. If the superintendent were bilingual, it would be perceived as a big plus. Those were the general themes in the report. I think it's important the board understand and the community understand. The report contains some criticisms of the district, and that is very common. I would suggest that you not take that as a negative thing, that you take that as allowing those people who have concerns to express those concerns and to share them with you. You want to be seen as a school board who listens to all those who have concerns. So I would suggest to you that this report is probably above average in positivity, and that the small amount of negative comments are normal, I guess is maybe, and common is a good thing to say. Before I go on to some of the next steps, I think I want to say that we had 284 responses to the online survey, only 7 in Spanish, but we had 277 responses in English from all of those individuals, students, staff, community members who were able to sign on to the SurveyMonkey. And that's one of the reasons why the report is so long. It's 110 pages, as I said earlier. Before I go on to some of the next steps, any questions about the report? And I think I said it was educational. I think I said it was stakeholders, but we are calling it the Educational Partners Input Report. So I apologize if I use the word stakeholder.
I actually want to comment on that, Steve, at the question opportunity, if I may.
Yes.
Having had the opportunity just as a board member to see 110 pages, I think you gave a pretty fair and cover of everything. I found my overall impression was I felt was a very healthy set of feedback. You talk about criticisms. There are tough words in there, but you know, tough words can be dealing with something that you know you're struggling with. It can be dealing with something that you overlooked. It can be dealing with something that's hopeful. I felt the overall tone of this exercise of the surveys. I frankly did not expect the 4 questions that I thought were a bit general to yield so much information, but it does show how many differences we've got. That's not necessarily bad. Any community has people with different opinions. It gives us a lot of clues. It's not a scientific survey. It's clues that have to be worked on. And at the end of the superintendent search, I believe part of McPherson and Jacobson's job is to provide a briefing for the incoming superintendent. So, you know, you have to look at a survey as containing a lot of valid feedback, and sometimes you're going to feel it's inaccurate. I don't think we should be sensitive about it. We should grab all of that together, recognize where we have conflicting opinions, and then figure out how to work it out together. You mentioned the word bridge. Pardon me for doing that, but I think that this is an opportunity for us to really open up a lot of input. And as I said, I think the executive summary that you gave is fair.
Thank you. Okay, if there are no further questions at this time, and feel free to send me an email, give me a phone call if you have any further questions about the process, where we are in the process, or anything about the Educational Partners Input Report. Applications will close on the 12th. Candidate vetting continues, well, it's beginning now, but really becomes full-time between the 12th and the 31st of January. The board will be, let me make sure I've got the right date. Apologize for that. The board will review candidates on the 31st, I believe, is our scheduled meeting date. That would be to review the applicants, all the applicants and the vetted applicants that come forward. And the board at that time would select first round Zoom interviews with individual candidates. That would be the first round. And then the second round would be an in-person. I'm not sure if the board would decide to do the Zoom interviews at a different time, but the interviews were scheduled for February 6th through the 10th. It's quite possible to do all of those during that timeline. And so I think that if depends on the number of individuals you wish to Zoom with and interview, during the time on the 31st, you will see all of those vetted candidates respond to 3 questions, 3 minutes each. So it's about 10 minutes each for each of those candidates. You'll also hear information that we heard from all of not only their references, but the people that we go 3 deep, we talk to, and make sure that they are who they say they are, because what people put on paper isn't always exactly who they are. So we want to make sure that they are as true and valid, and that information is scrubbed down to the very best possible way possible for us. And then I think you'll be able to go from there. The interviews, I said, somewhere between the 6th and the 10th. Site visits were scheduled for February 13th through 17th. That would be a subset of the board who would go and do their own validation in the final candidates community. Selection would be scheduled for February 27th. And of course, the new superintendent would take office on the 1st of July. And that's our current schedule. That's a current update on where we are. Things are going very well, by the way. Really enjoyed talking with everyone in your community and your students, especially your students. Great group of students. They even came to our community forum at the high school. It was great. Appreciate all of them. And it's been very enjoyable to this point. And we look forward to making your job difficult by trying to select who you want to interview.
Just for clarification purposes, the meeting scheduled for the 31st, that is a executive session, correct?
That is correct, because you will be dealing with personnel.
So no, thank you.
What time is that meeting?
6 o'clock. And I see Kim already has it on the board meeting schedule.
Mhm.
Steve, at this meeting, we will be reviewing the interview questions for the semifinal and the final and the stakeholder interviews.
Yes, the board should have received a sample set of questions from which they can choose 3. Basically 1 question for a stakeholder community interview team if that continues forward, and then 1 for the board interview, and then 1 for the Zoom interview of all the candidates. If those questions aren't sufficient, we certainly could provide more, or the board, if they had a specific idea, we can generate questions for you.
Thank you. Yeah, Kim sent out the list of the potential questions. We were asked to select questions for each of the 3 categories. So if you haven't done so, make sure you get your selections to Kim.
Yeah, and there's still time, but the sooner you get to it, the sooner we can get them all prepared.
Perfect. Any questions, comments? Great.
Thank you so much for your.
Thank you, Dr. Outer. We'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you again.
Have a good rest of your evening. Great. Okay. So I think if you haven't done so, like I said, get your questions on that spreadsheet that Kim sent out late last week. Okay. So next on the agenda, we have the budget guiding principles and goals. So I'll turn it over to Mr. Eagle.
Thank you. The Budget Committee has met, and we have some updates on some budget items that will be up for you to view here shortly here. And Liz, you can go right to the second slide on that. Great. So this is just a reminder as we head into a discussion of our budget that the district budget includes 5 distinct self-balancing fund accounts, and each of the accounts is designed for carrying out a specific purpose. And therefore, each of these distinct fund accounts has its own revenue source, specific expenditure purposes, and a separate balance. And the largest category we have in the budget is the general fund, which is what most people think of when you think of a district's budget. It's about 92% of our entire budget. And the general fund dollars are the dollars that are used for financing the everyday operations of the district. Student enrollment numbers drive our general fund revenue sources for the budget. So the state and federal dollars that we receive to operate the district are directly related to the number of students we serve and to the needs of those students. Because we've seen a decrease in enrollment, we're going to have to pay attention to that during budget season. We're going to be working to increase our efficiencies in the use of dollars, better align our staffing levels with actionable revenues due to enrollment moving forward. And with that in mind, let's look a little bit more at staffing costs. So Liz, if you want to go to the next slide. Within the general fund, typically about 83% of the dollars are used to fund our staff, which is everybody, teachers, paraeducators, principals, and the operational staff that help us keep things running. And the remainder of those general fund dollars are for supplies, materials, and purchase services. And as we look toward the 23-24 fiscal year, we really need to work on some budget assumptions. And one of the variables is staffing costs. Governor Inslee's proposed budget includes a 4.5 inflationary price deflator, which I will call IPD. And the IPD increases salaries to offset inflation. The final IPD percentage will be determined by the legislature at some point during this session. So we're watching that closely because it will also impact where things land for our budget. So on the next slide, it's just a reminder that with enrollment driving our revenue sources, we have had a decrease in enrollment, and that has been a trend since about 2015. Here you see enrollment numbers back to 2015, and there are some numbers circled in red that were projections used in the budgeting process for this year. And I kept the red circled numbers because until this month, those budgeted numbers were the numbers used by the state for our monthly apportionment. However, moving forward, after the month of January, our monthly apportionment will be based on our actual running average of monthly FTE. So we're moving into that season where we're moving out of budgeted numbers into our actual FTE averages for apportionment. And that first circled red number, 6,847, again, I left that in there because up until this point, that has been the number used for our monthly apportionment. But moving forward, that number will change to our actual FTE average, which is about 55 students higher. So we came in still with a decrease in enrollment, but a little higher than we expected. And that is great news. On the next slide, just a reminder that because we're looking closely at the budget this year, we formed a budget committee, but this budget committee will be involved in the process this year and is an ongoing committee. We've hosted one meeting. The cabinet members were there to talk about the budget process and timeline. And we also talked about a set of guiding principles and goals for the budget process moving forward this year and into the future. The next slide before we get to goals and guidelines is just a reminder of a rather aggressive budget process timeline that we have. There's a lot going on in the district in the next 2 months with the superintendent search and also with the budget according to this process and timeline that we've lined out. We talked about the timeline before, and just an update, we're wrapping up step 2 in this timeline and moving into step 3 at this time of year. So we have created some guiding principles and goals, which I will share with you in a moment. And we are preparing also to gather additional feedback from staff regarding the budget starting later this week. Step 3 of this process really is to share in a more broad way the guiding principles and goals that we've been working on and to gather feedback from staff. We have a survey that's going to go out later this week. It'll be open for about a week where we're asking staff about ideas for the budget process. And the goal is really that by mid-February, we can present some budget scenarios to the board. Again, that is an aggressive timeline in terms of the budgeting process. We're still very early as we just hit January, where we're finally actually using our average FTE for state apportionment, but we're committed to try and come as close to this timeline as we possibly can. I think we're going to be able to meet those dates. So what did we work on at the budget committee? If you want to go to the next slide, we talked about some guiding principles for budgeting in the district. And these guiding principles will be used this year and moving forward as sort of a framework for thoughts around budgeting. As part of our annual budgeting process, these guiding principles can be used from year to year as a framework to ensure that we allocate dollars in line with our priorities in the strategic plan, and also that we are accountable and transparent in the way we look at future budget planning. They will serve us in planning for a phased budget reductions during the next few years as we need to look to decrease our expenses, increase our efficiency, and better align our staffing levels with enrollment numbers. So you see those things reflected in the guiding principles. The first bullet talks about how we will employ the core values and priorities of the strategic plan in the budgeting process. We are recognized in our strategic plan. We have a strong focus on building future-ready students and our Big 6 outcomes. And so decisions we make about the budget should prioritize those future-ready outcomes. We also have core values and priorities identified in our strategic plan, which also provide a backbone and a framework for how we will make budget decisions moving forward. And the last 2 principles really deal with what I talked about in terms of transparency and accountability. And in a way that goes back to our core values. Accountability is one of the core values of the district, and that includes fiscal stewardship for our resources. In addition to the guiding principles, we talked about a set of goals. And on the next slide, you get a shot at these goals. And these goals deal with some of the reductions that we're looking at as we move to a phased 2-year type situation to try and get our staffing levels and our expenses in line with our decreases in enrollment. And among these goals, you see some things that will be helpful to us moving forward. The goals that you see here were created in collaboration with the cabinet team, our union leadership, and also the budget board committee. And we are going to look at things like natural attrition to assist with the impact of budget reductions And you also see reflected in these goals an attempt to spread the impact of reductions across grade levels and departments, as well as an attempt to manage this in a phased approach to reduce the impact of the reductions over the next 2 years. Also reflected is an attempt to bring focus again to the collaboration with and trust we build with our union leadership in creating potential scenarios. And we have been meeting about twice a month with our union leadership to keep them updated on our process. They've been involved in these goals that you see here. They've also been involved in discussion of the guiding principles that we shared earlier. And the last piece that I have in terms of the budgeting process is a look at our general fund balance, how that turned out when we closed the books for 21-22. We did some things intentionally early on that have paid off in terms of our general fund balance. So recognizing early on that we had some budget challenges coming, we had a one-time opportunity to do some intentional reallocation of resources and reduction in costs so that we could better leverage the funding we had available closing out last year. And that resulted in a savings to our general fund in the amount of $2.8 million, which was above our general fund projections from last June. That $2.8 million is important because our revised budget plan will continue by seeking to manage a phased reduction in expenses over the next 2 years in order to adjust our expenses and revenues to our expected enrollment levels. So these $2.8 million that we have in deliberate savings will be critical to offset potential lost revenue due to continued enrollment decline as part of that phased approach. The budget committee, the cabinet, and the fiscal staff will be working diligently to refine some of our budget assumptions and parameters in the next few weeks with the goal to share a targeted preliminary reduction amount at the January 23rd board budget workshop. So I guess that's a roundabout way of saying we hope to have a number by then that we can use as a target for preliminary reductions at the January 23rd workshop. Any community members or even the board that would be interested in finding out more about our budget or our budget process, if you can go to the last slide here. We do have lots of information about our budget on our website. It's fairly prominent to get to because it's linked from the main page. And we also have a URL and a QR code if people are so inclined to use their tech to get there in different ways. And would encourage anyone that's interested in learning more about our budget. We have an abundance of information available there in addition to what we do at these board meetings for reports. And that is my budget update for tonight. Questions?
Comments? I guess maybe from the budget committee members, what's I guess just initial reactions? I mean, obviously we have, yeah, thank you.
Well, we had a robust discussion between staff, and mostly the staff had prepared a basic draft of the guiding principles and the goals, and they were seeking the board members' responses to those items, which we engaged in active dialogue. Back and forth on giving feedback to the staff, but it was well received, and we can see that our input was incorporated into this presentation tonight. So I really do appreciate that, and I don't want to undervalue the significance of that $2.8 million. That is going to help us significantly towards what was originally projected to be a $10 million shortfall initially. So that's pretty significant. So we look forward to having a more in-depth, precise presentation on the 23rd and go from there.
I think what Laura said, I would very much agree with. I would just add a little bit. I think it's been very healthy to have the interaction, and things that I've been pleased to see is through the engagement, looking at using all the brains and all the resources in the school district, focusing on doing things better. The fact that the superintendent talks about a survey going out to staff on how to make things better for the budget. You know, a lot of stuff comes well bottom up. I think it also establishes teamwork and trust. And what I'd really like to see is that this budget is really the money that feeds the total plan of all our efforts. And I think we saw that in the presentation. So, and I think it's helpful to have, I certainly enjoy being on the budget committee as a board member. And I found that the response of cabinet has been great.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Okay.
Thank you to our committee members for your time and dedication on that. Up next is our discussion. I'll hand it over, let Bill continue on with the policies first read.
You bet. Thank you. So policy committee met and we did a look at these. So we have a first read of several policies for you. Policy 1610, which is really an updated policy around conflict of interest. We're in the category with districts that have 2,000 plus students. And this included some language from Senate Bill 6326 on municipal conflicts of interest and provided some amended threshold amounts regarding certain exceptions to the rule for conflicts of interest. Included with this is a revised version of the Avoiding Conflicts of Interest booklet, which is a great read if you have some extra time. I like to kind of do these one by one and then ask committee members additional pieces. Anything else on that? Okay, questions on that one?
I have one suggested revision to this policy, if we would indulge me on this. The very last page of the red line version, it says, before the board approves the employment of a director or a director's or an officer's spouse, and then it just says, comma, the superintendent or designee will inform the board. I would like it to say after officer's spouse as authorized by this policy. Simple change, but just making sure that the very last paragraph. So it's just confirming that when we make those type of hiring decisions, so long as it's consistent with the policy, because otherwise it's prohibited. So that's my only change.
Great, thank you. Anything else on this first one? Okay. Policy 2401 and 3117 are somewhat related. 2401 deals with financial education, mastery-based learning credit, and this is similar to other learning-based mastery learning-based credit opportunities that we have in the district, but it would add financial education to that list of mastery-based options that we have for students. And that brings us into compliance with a WAC 18051-050, which requires the boards to adopt an authorizing policy before we can award mastery-based credits. And we could do that as a district overall for all of our mastery-based credit options. But what we have done instead is we have a mastery-based credit option for each of the mastery-based credit pieces that we offer. So we have one for ELA, one for math. This would be financial education and several others. That then allows us to attach the procedure associated with each of those separately to the board policy that allows for them. So again, this would allow us in terms of the policy piece to offer mastery-based learning credits for financial education courses, and the associated procedure will delineate how we go about that. Questions or comments on 2401? Board?
I would have
Policy
one comment.
committee?
Yeah, I think all the policies we have, I think they're up to 10 now, have the same language. And so I think we decided that's fine. In terms of the procedure, financial literacy and our graduation requirements are relatively new. The procedure is not the board's decision, it's the district's. I think that there may be some work going from the standard text to aligning everything with the unique way we do graduation requirements and make sure that's in line. But that, I don't think that's anything significant, but yeah.
I think you're correct. Okay. Then a look at 3117, which is somewhat related. It has to do with students that have been in institutional facilities or coming to us from institutional facilities. And the House Bill 1295 asks schools to adopt a policy for awarding mastery-based credit for state and local assessments to students who are either in an institutional facility or coming out of an institutional facility. And so in that sense, it's similar to what we just looked at. It's another opportunity for mastery-based credit. But this policy goes beyond that in recognizing that removing some of the barriers to graduation that these students experience includes more than just offering mastery-based credit. And in that regard, the policy looks at some things that we currently actually do for migrant and homeless students and students in foster care, and moves those things over to youth that have been in institutional facilities as well. And that would be things like gathering partial credit opportunities, looking at graduation requirements for students who may have fulfilled requirements at another high school but don't quite meet our requirements in the district, and offering a diploma from their prior school. So there are a host of other barriers that are addressed within this policy, even though on its surface, it's about the mastery-based credit piece. Questions or additional comments by the policy committee? Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to lump the last two together here and just say that 1220 and 1225 really were not substantive changes, although we did remove some language in one of them about legislative rep interaction with the local press, because that was a part of the duty of the board president listed elsewhere in the policy. And so we did make that change, but other than that, the changes were non-substantive in a discretionary policy. So we actually have already posted updates on those. Okay. All right. Thank you. And I think that brings us to my report. So I'm just going to keep going. Wanted to share some great news with the board about some things that are coming up. So we, in a recent Seattle Times article that concerned students experiencing homelessness, the Wenatchee School District was highlighted in the article for our work in support of migrant and homeless students. And so I wanted to give a shout out to our special programs staff, our homeless liaisons, our federal programs director, who is quoted in that article, and our family advocates. And I shared a link to the article with you in last week's weekly update. It's a great read and some interesting information, and a nice highlight to work that's going on in our district in those areas. Also, an early heads up that our jazz workshops and jazz nights are coming up. If you're not familiar with those, the workshops and jazz nights are things we've done in the district since about 2001. It's an opportunity to pair professional jazz musicians and instructors with our jazz band students, and also jazz band students from 6 local middle and high schools in the area for a week. The young jazz band students get to hone their skills by playing and rehearsing alongside world-class jazz musicians. And at the end of the week, we do host 2 public concerts called Jazz Nights in the WHS auditorium. And those are great concerts. Friday, February 24th, Foothills Middle School, Pioneer, and Eastmont High School will be involved in a concert, a jazz night. And also on Saturday, February 25th, Orchard Middle School, Eastmont Junior High, and Wenatchee High School will be involved. And those concerts are done with the professional musicians as well. So it's a great opportunity to see the culmination of that week for our students with the jazz professionals. We do have another migrant bilingual PAC meeting coming up in a few weeks, January 25th in the Commons, and looking forward to that. I will be beginning some opportunities to share in the community more about our strategic plan. In the next month, I will be visiting several local Rotary groups and community organizations to spread the word about our strategic plan priorities and the work that we are engaging in as a district to move those priorities forward. So I'm looking forward to that. I will be starting with a few local Rotary groups and moving to several other community organizations to share the great work that's going on with our strategic plan. And last, but certainly not least, January is School Board Appreciation Month. And on behalf of myself and the cabinet, we want to say thank you for all your time, your attentiveness, and your dedication to leading our district. We all know the large amount of time that goes into what you do for our schools. And we will be recognizing the board and their tremendous work and leadership in a more formal way at our January 24th meeting, but wanted to say thank you today as well. And that is my report.
Thank you, Bill. Next on is board communication. Does anybody have? Since I'm looking at Martin.
Thank you. Yeah, you pointed the finger at me. Actually, Bill touched on some of the things that I think are really noteworthy, and it's nice to see. I'm going to use improvement as a theme, similarly the way I commented on the feedback we got from stakeholders. We're at different places on the journey, but when you hit the great successes, it's important to recognize it. And the only things the robotics, once again this year from Foothills, congratulations to Foothills. They're probably not the only heroes, but they're good ones. And then there was an article on Lewis and Clark working on reading, as the other schools do. All of these significant efforts yield results, matter, and thank you, staff and community.
I just want to comment on what the student body president from Wenatchee High School didn't touch on this one, but because it slips by when we do the winter concert, and people kind of forget about it when we come back. But I cannot tell you, boy, every jazz group, every wind instrument, the orchestra, the marching band, the a cappella singing groups, all, I mean, and they did a winter concert at the high school, completely filled the stage. I mean, there were that many kids there playing, and it's just remarkable. And it kind of gets missed because we're not meeting again for another few months. But boy, the work that they do, the music department there is just amazing. And it kind of harkens back to time that Avery was at Orchard Middle School. Jeff Sandberg, his father, is the one that started the Jazz Nights program, and not only they're Grammy Award winning jazz players that come and teach these kids for a full week, and it has been one of the very best things that Avery has done in the Wenatchee School District. And I'm not sure, but what they did in the past was the professionals played on Thursday night at the PAC, and then the professionals and the students played together. And if you want to see a good jazz concert, I hope they're doing that still, but if they do, that's really, really worth it to have that high caliber musicians here in town. So I'd say yay to that for sure.
Also wanted to recognize our recently retired sports medicine director, Dale Blair, who was inducted into the WIA Hall of Fame for athletic trainers. We have had a world-class athletic training program in our high schools, and no small contribution from Dale. So appreciate that.
Just to add to that, just commend the district on the partnerships with outside sports organizations. Just a partnership that's there to allow the use of facilities during this winter time, which is pretty essential for our youth, and all groups that, that exercise needed something to do, winter, snow. I think the district, I've been involved with a couple organizations, and the district has been very great to work with, and the accessibility of the buildings to the community has been wonderful. That is all I have. Just a reminder, we do have a board workshop this Friday at 1 to 3:30. Correct. Yep. And then we will follow that with the closed session. That's it. If we don't have any other board communication or business, this meeting is adjourned.